The first speaker is going to be Nicole Dvorak, data scientist and data insights innovation for Forrester Research. She's going to talk to us about combining data from mobile behavior, survey responses, and online discussions to uncover why some apps keep users engaged more than others. When I asked Nicole about something that probably most of you in the audience wouldn't know about her, she told me that she has watched an entire 3 seasons of Real Housewives of Atlanta in preparation for her first official visit to the city. So let's welcome Nicole to the stadium.
Thank you. That's true, by the way. Thank you, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So I want to start by asking any of you who is experimenting with new or different data sources or methodologies. Could us raise their hands? Or thinking about experimenting with new or different. All right, if your hand isn't up, you probably shouldn't be here. But lately, there's been a constant hype of new methodologies out there. And we can see this in the sheer number of research techniques that are available for us today. And it's in an effort to make sense of this huge amount of data that we're now amassing about our consumers and that we're able to collect about our consumers. And so at Forrester, instead of deciding on one methodology or one data stream to be the shiny object that sort of solves this big data problem, we experimented with combining multiple data sources, a lot of times from the same panel of consumers, in order to get at more insights that are more actionable and more innovative, but also more accurate. And we do this because we know, for a number of reasons, that humans are irrational. Behavioral economics have told us for a long time that humans, they make decisions based on their emotions, they get overwhelmed when there's a lot of choices. I was personally overwhelmed by the amount of dessert options that there were both days today. And so it's harder to predict what they're going to do. So when you combine multiple data sources, it's easier for those predictions to be more accurate. So we attempted, and I'm going to share with you 3 case studies today of when we're combining these different data sources and methodologies to see whether we were actually getting at more innovative, actionable insights. And so the first one is we were curious about whether push notifications are able to change consumers' behavior on their smartphones. And I know for me personally, I've sort of blocked a lot of these out. I don't really receive a lot of push notifications. I wanted to see whether those who were receiving push notifications actually responded to them and behaved differently. And so the first thing we did was we did a traditional market research approach, and we asked in a survey. We asked consumers which types of push notifications did they opt into. And we asked this about different types of push notifications. So everything from social networking push notifications to shopping push notifications to finance push notifications. And based on their responses, we divided these groups of consumers into groups based on yes or no. So yes, no, finance, push notifications, and so on. Next, what we did is we used another data source, passive behavior tracking on mobile phones, and we observed each group's behavior, specifically about those apps on which they asked, or they were asked about push notifications. So yes, no, I opt into shopping apps, shopping app push notifications, and we looked at their shopping app behavior. And we did this across the line, across many different categories. So what did we find? We found that shopping app push notifications and opting into them generate more engagement, generate more frequent access. But finance apps were the opposite. They actually generated less engagement with finance apps, and users accessed them less frequently. So why was this happening? And we sat there and we scratched our heads and we thought, we can come up with hypotheses as to why this was happening, or we could use another methodology to try and confirm our hypotheses. And so what we did is we used an online market research community. And we asked them point blank, what do you get out of finance app push notifications? And we found that consumers found peace of mind because they were relieved of the responsibility of going into the app and checking their bank statements, making sure that they paid their bills on time, making sure that there weren't any fees. And so that relieved them from going into the app and actually engaging with it And so we could see how a decreased engagement was actually a better customer experience in finance apps. We may have not concluded this correctly, and we may have thought that maybe finance push notifications were actually a bad thing because they were leading to less engagement with finance apps, and that was actually translated into failure. But that's not the case. And so we can see how combining multiple sources of data, and sometimes from the same group of individuals, can lead us to more accurate results, and results that are more innovative, meaning that we wouldn't be able to find out the insight without combining multiple data sources. So this study led us to conclude that consumers are particular about the apps they receive. And it's important to identify why consumers receive push notifications in the first place, and then ensure that those push notifications that you send are relevant and contextualized so that users find them valuable enough to keep them coming. So, great success. We fulfilled our curiosity about using different data sources, and we decided to apply this methodology or this framework to another interesting event in this case. It generates an unprecedented level of viewership, and it's the 49th annual Super Bowl. I chose this because I'm from Boston. So we wanted to see how consumers were interacting with technology on the day of the Super Bowl, and specifically how marketing professionals could use this information to better connect with consumers on that day. So what we did is we used 3 different sources of data. We used our behavioral passive tracking app, we used the community data, and we used a social listening tool to see what was organically getting said about the Super Bowl day on public forums and social networks. Using our passive behavior tracking app, we looked at app and website behavior on the day of the Super Bowl and compared it to the average day. And what we found is in the top graph here, app behavior did not deviate too much from the average day. Obviously, sports apps were a little bit more popular, more frequent visitors, more visitors on that day, but everything else generally stayed the same. Websites, however, mobile websites, experienced larger deviances from normal behavior. Things like sports, obviously, but then we also got food and drink, reference, health and wellness. And so we could see how a certain segment of mobile behavior changes while a certain segment stays the same, using one data source. Another data source we used was our social listening tool. And we looked at conversations related to recipes and food. And we saw that recipe conversations peaked a little bit before game time. And food conversations behind this little green blob here peaked up right up until the game and then sort of dropped off. And so we looked deeper. And in this green box, you'll see the results from our mobile behavior tracking study, which looked at the mobile websites that consumers were visiting before and after the game. So before, you can see that they're more cooking websites. After the game, they're more quick service, restaurant, fast food type websites. And the last data source we used was community data. And we asked our community what would be the ideal experience for you on Super Bowl day. And we got things like, we want to watch commercials immediately after they appear. We want to see behind-the-scenes footage. We want more ways to engage with consumers besides just a Twitter hashtag. And so it was clear to us that we have this huge base of viewers that may not necessarily be football fans, but may also be just ad fans or halftime show fans or even just, frankly, food fans. And they're here watching, and they want to engage further. And they have these devices at their disposal to do so with. And so we concluded that it's important to appeal to ad fans and not just football fans. And you can use smartphones to engage with consumers because that's what they're looking for. And it's important to start with a mobile website and not an app, because we saw that mobile website behavior deviated more on that day. And we could also conclude that it's probably because it deters, or apps deter people from downloading the app. You know, there's a lot of costs with storage and time and all this stuff. So start with a mobile website. So we saw this second case study, and we saw that combining different methodologies allowed us to get at what consumers are doing on that day. We wanted to actually apply this framework to a business question that our clients were asking us. So we have to get to work someday, right? So we included in our third case study that I'm about to share with you an additional layer of analytics, and we used actual models that linked consumer attitudes and behaviors. And I'll show you that in the next slides. So we wanted to know what features in apps are generating user engagement. So what keeps users coming back time and time again? And we wanted to see across all different types of apps. So we included everything from shopping to travel to finance. Travel, there's about 7 or 8 different, health and wellness I think was in there. There's about 7 or 8 different categories. So we started by asking our consumers survey questions. And we asked about 4 randomly selected apps that they used. We asked things like, how did you discover the app? How did you discover the app? How did you first learn about the app? And then most importantly, what are the key features in that app and how much do you agree with them on a scale of 1 to 5? So things like, does it save me time? Does it crash often? Does it help me do a task? Is it easy to navigate? Next, what we did is we looked at the smartphone behaviors using our behavioral passive tracking app and looked at those apps specifically about the questions that they answered. So if I was answering about a Delta travel app, then I was then observed about my behavior on Delta. So we were able to link the survey responses directly with that consumer's usage of that app. And then finally, we engaged our same group of participants in a community to ask specific questions and pointed questions about what we found by linking the survey data and the mobile behavior tracking data. So this approach allowed us to align a single person's characteristics, so everything from their demographic information to their thoughts and attitudes about a particular app with their actual behavior on that app. And from that, we built a model. And we teased out the features across all these different apps and all these different app types that led to more user engagement. And what we found was 3 things. It needs to meet a need, it needs to have simple navigation, and it needs to entertain. So let me go over these a little bit more in detail. It needs to meet a need. So consumers responded about whether they thought that this was the first app of its kind to be able to do something. If it met a need, it was great. If it was the first app to be able to meet that need, it was even better, and it generated incremental engagement with that app. So an app that performed particularly well was MyFitnessPal here, and we did the study about 18 months ago. And so users found that it was the first app that sort of allowed them to aggregate not only their workout information, their health and fitness information, but then also it had this huge library of foods that they could then input, and they could then match up their calorie intake with their calorie burn rate, and it was the first app that allowed them to do that. Simple navigation. So by now, most sophisticated companies have implemented easier navigation controls. But when we did this study about 18 months ago, that wasn't the case. And there were particular apps that adopted navigation features earlier than others, and we saw that those apps were actually being used more frequently by those users, controlling for everything else. These includes things like swipes and hand gestures instead of like scrolling and not having mobile optimized features. And then the last thing was entertainment. And entertainment spans more than just gaming or news and media apps or apps that are typically used to entertain. It goes into things like loyalty points and historical progress. And so I remember there was one travel app that actually had a game feature in the app, but it was really meant to facilitate travel and check-in and all that stuff. But then it had like this Sudoku feature in it. That's not what we mean by entertainment. That's not what we mean just slap a game in an app and, oh yeah, check the entertainment box. It needs to be thoughtful. It needs to ensure that users come back. So things like gamification, things like historical progress tracking, things like being able to share your progress with other social communities or your online community, encourages people to come back and use the app. And this spans all app categories. So lastly, we also prodded our community to give us specific examples of apps that delighted them in these various ways. And so we got things like the Mint app was one of the first to be able to aggregate my finances into one place. We got things like the Untapped app, which is actually very popular in New England because of the whole IPA craze up there, where people can log in the beverages that they have consumed. It has this loyalty sort of badge rewards thing where it's actually not linked to anything except for a virtual badge sort of competition within this app and in this app alone. But yet that created engagement with this app, and it made people who were using the app, it created entertainment. And so I hope that these 3 case studies, you can see how combining multiple methodologies and multiple data sources not only allows you to get a more accurate insight and confirm insights, but also more innovative insights. Because using just one data source, we would not be able to land at the insights we had with just using one data sources. So it's important to be able to use multiple methodologies and everything that we've seen here in the conference as well, to be able to track what consumers say they do, what they are actually doing, and then hopefully be able to better predict what they will be doing in the future. So next time you have a project, think about these sources of information that are available to you at your organization and see how they can complement one another, either simultaneously or sequentially, to get at action that is accurate and innovative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Do we have any questions on the floor? No questions? I have one if nobody raises their hand. Well, I have a question for Nicole. You spoke about collecting different types of data. So you spoke about survey and passive and community. How do they inform each other, those data?
That's a great question. So we've been experimenting with different ways and different sequences of implementing these different methodologies and data sources. And we're definitely still in a discovery phase right now. We've found that a lot of times in some of the case studies that you've seen, linking survey responses with behavior is very informative, and that's sort of a simultaneous way of using data. The community data has been great in doing sort of pre-work to surveys, but also after uncovering some insights from combining survey and behavior data, it's also a great tool to use following up. And so you can see how the behavior in the survey can then inform what you're going to be asking in your communities. So it's important to think about the sequence of when to use these different data sources, and a lot of times it will be very specific to the problem that you're trying to solve.
And any questions? No, we've got another minute, so I'll ask another one. You spoke about mobile just a little bit. Can you tell us how mobile behavioral data is collected?
So we actually partner with Research Now. They have a mobile tracking app, and the users download the app, and it tracks their behavior 24/7, 365. And we get essentially a timestamp for every activity that they're doing. So everything from apps to websites, which are the 2 primary behaviors, but calls and other things as well. And then we aggregate the data, and we're also able to ask this panel survey questions as well. So that's a way that we're integrating survey and behavior data together.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you.
Give Nicole a hand.